Visible army. Exactly.
Just because this is how things have been done for so long, I think it's all kind of waking up to a litany of things that need.
Yep. It's a fascinating time to be involved in politics these days.
Does anybody ever ask to see the numbers of all my constituents?
Nope.
I'm a fact-driven person, so.
Nope.
Nobody
Not
ever
very often.
says, what's the data?
Senator Tucker has asked, I'll keep coming back to these direct democracy bills. Senator Tucker has asked several times, Senator Hammer, I appreciate that you think this is a problem and that you're solving a problem. I'd love to know how many people have actually contacted. Can you give me any examples of like specific numbers of fraud, of abuse in the direct democracy ballot initiative process? There is never a finance.
Never a number.
Yep. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up, like, again, all of these things can be used to pass really poor policy, but it's important to be able to understand how the tool can work so that we know, oh, you are absolutely selling me something I don't like right now. Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw out a quick comment in response to something I heard, that the process, I mean, yeah, all of this can be used for good and ill, but because it's being used for ill is not necessarily a justification that it needs to be changed.
100%.
It's more when you're creating a process, obviously any process can be used for nefarious purposes or obviously benevolent purposes.
Yeah.
So
a process is a tool, and like I can use a hammer to build a house. I can also use a hammer to hit someone, you know, like tools are only as good as the people using them. And so that's another reason why we have to hold our legislators to account to make sure that they're using these processes in the way that we want them to, in the way that's good for our communities, in the way that's good for our state.
yeah, our involvement's the best defense to make sure they don't use them for nefarious purposes.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, we try.
Well, we try.
Some of us do, yes.
Well, it is, but it would also be nice if there was a tool to work when you have the sneaky suspicion that someone is being nefarious.
Yeah.
Well, something to safeguard us, because not everybody's paying attention to these.
Yes.
You know,
Most
and then
are not.
bam, once they're in, it's much harder.
Well, let's stick with the direct democracy for a second. This part here says, who needs to communicate this problem? Senator Hammer is a really poor choice to pass all of these bills, because these bills, if you're not aware, most of these bills put a lot of power into the Secretary of State's office to disqualify various signatures, to there's a new law enforcement division within the Secretary of State's office, all this stuff, right? Guess who's running for Secretary of State in 2026? It's Senator Hammer. And so it is an odd choice to have him run all of these bills, because it's very easy for people to look at it and say, like, well, man, this is all going to benefit you, right? It's a strange choice to have him run those bills instead of any of the other 28 Republican senators or however many there are, you know?
And yet they always vote on party lines.
They sure do.
Yeah.
Is it a strange choice, or
Mostly.
is it an obvious choice as to his,
They call him B.
you know,
Yeah, I'm also a little cynical these days sometimes, but
how can you know?
when I say it's a strange choice, strategically, I would have, if I wanted to give myself a lot of power, I would walk over to Senator Sullivan's office and be like, hey man, you wanna run these bills for me? So like they're not pinning it on me.
It's an obvious conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And if it gets out in the media properly, that could be a tool
Mhm.
to turn the public against them.
In every social media thread I write, I try to remind people that he's running. You were saying?
Senator Hammer.
Kim Hammer.
Oh, Kim Hammer. He's the senator, Benton County? Saline County. Saline County. Benton, the town Benton,
From
Saline.
him at that meeting.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yep.
Still-
Okay. Any other questions on setting the agenda? Y'all are asking great questions. Great crowd. Thank you so much.
We're engaged.
Yeah. You pop over one slide. Maybe, hopefully.
It's not responding.
It's not responding to me.
Needs to be so many options.
Paul?
Two moments, earning their keep tonight.
Go back.
Trying to do Zoom in a live
It's-
presentation is so difficult.
You know, I felt a little bad about asking Dr. Cho to reschedule, but as someone who was teaching college courses during 2020 and learning to use Zoom,
It's really hard.
not for me.
I thought Teams would work so much better.
I do like Teams. Okay, so the next step is formulating the policy. And this is the step that we're in right now, or rather that we've just kind of passed. And this is the step that I had a lot of experience with when I was at the Bureau of Legislative Research. I put their little logo down there because I really appreciate the hard work they do, especially during session. They work a lot of late nights. And in a lot of ways, this is a strangely simple step. There's really only kind of three parts to it. You have to research the problem, understand, is there data that I can access about this problem? Do I need to do stakeholder interviews to understand, like my example about the pothole in front of your house, right? Like that's a problem that you can understand with just a single interview. Problems that are national or statewide require things like data analysis. I'm not a data guy and I don't want to, step into a lane that is certainly not mine, but that is an important part of the policymaking process. Once you have all of that research done, you move on to strategizing. No policy is perfect, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And so how do we use that research that we've done, how to, to strategize and start to kind of develop the overall contours of the law, of the policy that we'd like to write. And then you get to do my absolute favorite thing in the world to do is write it. I love writing policies. I love writing in general. And that can look a number of different ways depending on what you're trying to do necessarily. Are you trying to actually write a law? Are you working for a state agency that needs to implement a law down the line? Are you working for a nonprofit like myself, like Davis, like Dr. Choate, and are trying to recommend a policy for someone, right? And so how you write that policy looks a little different depending on where you're standing, but every policy requires some kind of writing. You have to get it into language that legislators will understand. You have to remember that legislators aren't necessarily experts, but they are often receptive to whatever you're trying to do. And so you have to understand how to communicate what you've researched, what you've strategized, and get it into language that people can understand and that will be an effective policy once it's implemented. This is the step that we are at right now as a state, adopting a policy. We are passing laws. We are, rewriting agency rules. The policy, is it urgent? Do we need to pass an emergency clause?
Yes.
Yeah. Most policies are urgent. And do we need to tweak who is being given control over implementing the policy? I want to focus on the urgently needed section just for a second, because this is one of those things that feels a little inside baseball, if you will. When you're reading laws, when you're looking at things that you're passionate about, it's always useful to know whether or not there's an emergency clause attached to the law. Why is that? Most laws go into effect 90 days after the governor signs them. That usually tends to be around August, mid-August or so. They're usually, fingers crossed, finish the legislative session around late April, early May. If an emergency clause is passed, that means it goes into effect as soon as the governor signs it. That can have a big effect on how effective the policy is down the line, because that 90 days can give a state agency or whoever is trying to implement the policy time to figure out how the heck are we going to do this? You've passed this massive policy and now I have to do it immediately. Like that can really hamstring an effective implementation of a policy if they're required to start implementing it immediately. So it's very interesting to know what kinds of laws are getting emergency clauses. I'll come back to direct democracy again. All 6 of those bills have emergency clauses attached. And again, many senators are asking, he had to fight really hard to get 2 of those emergency clauses passed because people are like, man, there's not an election for 2 years. Where's the fire? Like, what are we doing, And so it is interesting to know what laws get those emergency clauses and perhaps why they get those emergency clauses. Hopping up one to, do rules need to be written? As you're reading laws, if you see, and again, this is near and dear to my heart as a former legal editor, there's a phrase that appears more than almost any other phrase in the law, in the entire Arkansas Code. And it usually reads something like, and then the agency will promulgate rules. What does that mean? That means that, again, legislators are not experts. Very rarely are they experts in a particular whatever they're passing the law about. So what they do is they delegate to some kind of state agency, and that's the rulemaking process. They'll pass a law very broadly that says, okay, we'd like to fix all the potholes in Little Rock. Absolutely not a single legislator in the legislature right now knows how to fix a pothole, knows what materials they need to fix a pothole, knows how to hire anyone that knows how to fix a pothole. So using that example, they would say, and the city of Little Rock will promulgate rules to fix all the potholes. That kind of passes the buck down to some kind of agency that does know how to do all of those things. The city of Little Rock, works in roads department. And those people will carry out actually implementing the policy. That's important for y'all especially because by law, almost every single rule in state government requires a public comment section. They really hate it when people actually make use of that public comment section. They will hide where to submit public comments. They make it very difficult to submit public comments, but nevertheless, you can submit public comments on every single rule ever created by a state agency. And so it's hard to kind of give a specific action step on this one because it does really require the public to understand what agency is going to be implementing this rule, when the public comment period is. But nevertheless, it is important for you to recognize that if you're reading a law you think you're going to hate and it has that special phrase, the agency or the department or the division will promulgate rules to carry out this section, that is your in. You can look up where that public comment section is and you can make your very politely worded thoughts known about how you think that rule should be carried out. A good example of this is last year, Get Loud Arkansas was trying to create an easier way to register voters. They had an online portal for voter registration. The State Board of Election Commissioners and the Attorney General decided that nope, we actually would like to make it harder for people to vote, but they had to do a rule. And so that meant that there was a public comment section. And boy, howdy, it did my heart so good to watch the number of people that were actually paying attention that showed up to speak against that rule. The rule still went into effect. It is Arkansas. Sometimes things don't go the way we'd like them to, but nevertheless, it is so important for you to understand that you have a chance to speak directly to the state agencies that are implementing the policies the legislators are passing through that public comment section. Any questions so far? Yes. Needed some water anyway.
Is there one group that's typically responsible for making the policy rules, or is it collaborative between BLS and?
Depends. It's usually put entirely onto whatever agency has been delegated, right? So if it's a Department of Education or some kind of education law, it'll be the Department of Education, could be Natural Resources Division. It really does depend on what the law is, but all of them will have some kind of rule or public comment section.
Okay. That was a leading question to the next one. Where do you go to make the
again? This is it's such a frustrating. They really do make it tough sometimes to find out where you can make public comment, but it's always possible. You just, and that's why I hesitate to talk about specific agencies because they're all a little different. They'll all put them in different spots. They'll all, so you just got to get good at Googling on that front. I wish I could give you better, firmer action set. You had your hand raised?
Yeah, I was going to comment on that. Because obviously, as you said, it depends on the agency that's in charge.
Mhm.
But they have to provide the public notice
Mhm.
that there will be public hearings and an open comment section. So like I went to a notice and comment last summer on a change in the driver's license policy and spoke.
Oh yeah. I
Um,
thought you looked familiar. Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
Carry on. Yeah.
so, and yeah, I guess we met there. That's right.
Mhm.
But under that, you would look under the DF&A because they're in charge of the Revenue Office and DMV,
Mhm.
Finance and Administration. And they basically post, again, you have to dig down in the website or call them or whatever, but they will post where and when the public hearing is. And then you can go to it and spread the word.
Yeah, and this is, I'll come back to you in a sec. This is again where like there's just a frustrating lack of transparency in actually attempting to help the public find where to do these public comments. In every full code section, at the beginning of that section, if they're talking about a specific department or division, this is really inside baseball stuff, I apologize, but the full name of the department or the division or the agency will be at least once in the beginning of that code section. The problem is that not every bill as it's written and placed on the website has the entire code section. So if you see, this bill amends section 721-106 or whatever, but it only is adding a section at the end, it might not have the division name in that specific bill. So then you got to go to the RLEG website, type in that full section, look at the full section to find out what agency will actually be creating that rule. It can be very frustrating. Yes?
The bills have to tell you what agency they're doing?
Not necessarily. Yeah.
The law will.
The full law will, but if you're just looking at the bill as passed, not necessarily, because they don't have to put their full code section, the full section of the law that's being amended in specific bills. Sorry, it's a little tricky. Does that make sense?
Sort of, kind of, yes.
Sort of, kind of, yes. Okay. Let's say a section of the law has section A, B, C. There's a bill and the law is talking about the Department of Education. So in section A, at least one time, they will have to say, the Department of Education shall do X, Y, and Z. Let's say Senator Sullivan's passing a bill that is only adding section D to that A, B, and C. That section, that bill, as it's written and placed on the website for you as a member of the public to look at, will only say this bill is adding section D to this section. And so the bill, as you're looking at it, might not say that it's the Department of Education, because the way code style works, the way laws are written, you only have to put it one time per code section. So if you are interested in understanding more about the rulemaking for this particular bill, you may have to go look at that full section to understand that this is actually an education bill, and you need to go to the Department of Education website to find out when the rulemaking, the public comment section is. Yep.
Well, it becomes,
They are not making it easy for you,
it
genuinely.
becomes intuitive over time. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
realize
Mhm.
what, essentially what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
But I think it is a hard reading, it's hard to get that literacy.
Mhm.
I think I lived in Arkansas 2 years before I actually found that website, because if you just Google law,
Yeah.
the first 4 hits that you get are not actually going, are not actually going to be to that. Then you have to go in there, and then you have to say you're not a robot, and then you have to figure out how to use the table of contents, which is extremely difficult to follow.
Yep.
So I would just like to say that I appreciate when interested parties put these things on social media so we know about them. And I actually think that one of the easiest ways to be on top of this kind of thing is to just follow the groups that you know are invested in these kinds of things, and like, cause like, why are we reinventing the wheel?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So like, if you care about the trans bills like I did as well, right? You know, like I'm following Intransitive and you know, like I'm following Group Collective, and these are groups that push this out.
I just wanna make sure everyone's seeing the image right here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry, I'm an expected foster parent slash adult.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Right, you know, so it's like, I think that like, you know, it's helpful, right, if groups like y'all push these things out,
Yeah,
right? You know?
and again, I worked for a long time as a legal editor, so I don't wanna take up too much time with y'all's, you know, valuable, you know, one wild and amazing life tonight, but I'm happy to give anybody a crash course in just understanding legislative language, because it is, again, not especially easy to understand it sometimes.
That's one quick question. You were saying you have to go to the I have spent some time on the state legislature code. And so there's titles and then there's sections. It's the section that will tell you what
Yes.
Agency?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when I pull out the whiteboard, because again, former college teacher, love a good whiteboard. I'll take a second to like explain a little bit how the code sections work. Much more at the end when people, they need to leave, can leave, and again, I don't want to take up too much time with that, but that is a very important skill that is, just takes time to learn. Like many skills, I suppose.
One other question, just to be clear. Will it only go into the rulemaking process if the bill specifically says that it will be promulgated by an
Yes.
agency?
Mhm.
And so some of these hammer bills that I have read, I do not think they say that.
A lot of them don't. The 212, the one that would do a new like law enforcement division.
The Secretary of State Police is what we're.
Yeah.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Petition police.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that one has a rulemaking section.
that might.
But I'm not, and yeah, so the rulemaking process doesn't always apply. That's a good point. But when it does, that you have to go through that process to find it.
Okay.
Most of the more specific bills will have to go through some kind of rulemaking process. Just because again, legislators are not experts, they just kind of throw things. That's one of the reasons why at the national level, the hamstringing of various federal agencies is so concerning, because these are the people that are keeping the water on, you know? Anyway,
Can I ask you,
sure.
so has anyone ever thought to introduce a policy to make it easier for anyone to find the public code?
Many times. Many
It's
times.
always.
Nope, never gets a bite. Because, yeah,
They hide it for a reason.
they got it for a reason. And like, it's not, I will say,
on themselves.
it's not always a nefarious reason, to be totally fair. But there are enough times where the policy, even if it's not explicitly detrimental to the public, wouldn't necessarily help the public, and they would prefer things like GitLab Arkansas's voter registration portal last year, right? People like to be able to vote and register to vote. And so it was a big deal when that many people signed up to, you know, sent in public comment, because it showed that the public really was paying attention. But, you know, there are so many, you know, think about all of the steps I explained just now, right? And like, you guys are incredibly engaged and like intelligent, and, you know, you are here to like learn how to do this kind of thing. And most, you know, there's 100,000 people in Little Rock, and there's 40 people in this room on Zoom. You know, it is genuinely tough to learn and can be frustrating to learn. The process is often designed to not be especially friendly to people that are interested in it. Yeah. Yeah.
So if there's something that is concerning within like either like the trying to pass a law or like just the way that one's positioned or program, who would be someone to like report that to? For example, I noticed that Arkansas, so I moved here about a year.
Welcome.
Thank you. But I had to register. I always register to vote like first thing. And I went on, I don't know if this was a newer thing they've adopted, I went on, obviously, the Board of Elections for the state, like that's where you go. To find like polling place, things like that, you know, sample ballots. There were about 10 pages that I had to click through. And what's interesting is one specific one, you had to agree to these to see any information. One specific section was like 13 or 14 reasons why your polling place might be inaccurate and they were not responsible for it. And I noticed that where I live is Soma, which obviously is very gentrified and pushing up on a lot of poverty. So when I went in to vote, I mentioned my issue to one of the workers, and she said, we've had a lot of people coming in who have been in the completely wrong place. Now I purposely didn't I'm a Democrat, but I purposely didn't put my affiliation.
Sure.
I knew that would affect it.
Sure.
But that I tried reporting it to what I assume are the correct people, report elections and stuff, and no one cared. Is there anything you could do to follow up with stuff like that just seems wrong? I feel. Okay, I know it's America.
Yeah. I'm trying not to be because
is anyone not corrupt?
we can't answer that question. That is another thing. Soma, I want to say your legislator is Denise Kennett, your rep. Could be wrong about that. But that's something your legislator, even if they don't know, they do have avenues to help you find out who to report it. If they do know, they can also, influence that. They can help you make that report. Otherwise, just sending lots and lots of emails and telling all of your friends to send lots of emails. And as a millennial, I really loathe making phone calls, but I've really gotten good at them lately because if you can make yourself make that phone calls mean more than an email.
Yeah, I literally.
I wish there was a better answer, but sometimes it's just.
And I talked to someone and just the sheer amount of just why should I freaking care?
Yeah.
Just literally could not care less.
Yep.
And I was like, why are you working in this office then?
Mm-hmm. I struggled a little bit making this PowerPoint because I think it's so essential for citizens to be involved in the policymaking process. And there are so many avenues for citizens to make little inputs into that policymaking process, but there's no one big thing. It requires just constant effort, constant vigilance. You just really have to be on top of things to know, all right, here's when, Dr. Choate and I have been frustrated a lot with the way agendas are made at the legislature during committee meetings because they can just randomly decide to not hear a bill that's on the agenda. And so I've spent the last, 24 hours getting doctors to speak against Baby Olivia bill, and Mary Bentley just decides not to run it. It's wild. There are all these little, and it's I don't want to turn anyone off from activism and making your voice heard. But you cannot get discouraged because it is going to take just ramming your head against the wall over and over again until it breaks.
From what I understand too, Sarah, if I could be a douchebag, sorry, but accurate. So apparently I've learned this from some of the Democratic, group. She calls a lot of special sessions outside of outside of the actual time frame where they should be working to pass her own special little bills and agendas. And doesn't really tell anyone until they pass, which I don't understand how that can't be regulated. I mean, I do, but I don't.
It's I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but it's a good point. Again, one of those, because we expect the regular sessions to be, activists are getting ready, they're prepping all of their people to testify, and it is frustrating when she calls a special session. AC did it a couple times. But more for things like tax cuts that most people, whatever. But the special session is an interesting quirk of Arkansas politics for sure. Okay. Any more questions on this? No. Yeah.
Not sure if this is right, but I have noticed that. I mean, obviously, Arkansas is the poorest state. I say that in air quotes because freaking Walmart's here. But so what I've noticed is that things unless you're in dire need, things like DHS and things like housing, not even housing, DHS, any kind of accessibility, any resources are just crap. I've never seen it where it's like they just do, I mean, I know that the people there are like overworked, they're underpaid, and also they've cut like, a lot of people need to be there. But it's kind of it's a ridiculous bar, like, because I know across the country it's like that. The bar for any kind of DHS stuff is literally set. For example, I make less than $6 a month, too much to get Medicaid. I know someone who makes $1 too much, which obviously doesn't compare.
Yeah.
And I mean, there has to be like some way to technically go and talk to like your legislature about, hey, we can budget or raise it. I just don't know where to start, but I've also noticed like the resources here are terrible. Like it's so hard to find anything.
Yeah. That's more of a organizations like Davis might be able to help a little bit more with this too. Organizations like Disability Rights of Arkansas, if you are looking for, they can help a little more. There are organizations that specifically help with educational resources, but that there are nonprofits here and there that can help you better access those, but you're not wrong in that those resources are often difficult to access.
I've never been to a place where the whole state just hates disabled people. Like, I've never been to one. The first.
New Hampshire, live free and die.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go there, it's cold.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Exactly. That's why we're here.
And there's what we found too, there's just a lot of nonprofits in Arkansas that are doing similar kinds of things, and we're not all aware of each other. That's part of the problem. It's one reason we're a network, is one of the things we want to do is connect with as many different groups like for our kids and get lives, so that we can figure out, are we sliding over into each other's lanes? Are we duplicating services?
Yeah.
Because there's only so much money available for nonprofits, and of course there's a limit to what's available. So
Resources.
if we can specialize and if we can not duplicate, and that starts with awareness. So we've got to really start connecting with other nonprofits and make them all aware of each other.
Yeah, no, that's a huge deficit I've noticed, especially with like queer resources, homeless resources, things like that, is no one communicates.
Right.
No one is talking to each other. No one is like really putting stuff out there in the places it needs to be. And so you get a lot of people who just fall through the cracks or like can't get what they need.
So my impression of Arkansas, and I lived for Illinois most of my adult life, is that we are a state who prides ourselves on low taxes and lots of charity. So I don't know if you guys have ever been to one of our mini charity balls, where women pay more for their dress that they wear one time than they give to the charity, but we have those every single weekend. And therefore, women and children, or women and families first, is to protect people, women from domestic violence. And then we have, the hospitals. And then we have the 67 food pantries in Little Rock alone, because we are number one in food insecurity. So it's an interesting cultural dynamic, that we don't want the government to provide these policies, but we want to feel good about ourselves by giving money to charities. And that is fundamentally, and when you think about 67 food pantries, a lot of those are volunteer, but a lot of these nonprofits, you've got this whole hierarchy of people to pay. You've got the president, you got the business development person, it's very inefficient. It's inefficient. And that's why other states use government to do these things.
Yeah. It's not, there's no communication again.
That's not what we do here.
Yeah.
And so we gotta figure this out.
Yep.
Well, notice it's not organized either, because you end up getting like, if I Google it, I could find maybe 5, and they're all different. So like, it doesn't tell you, hey, here's the date you can actually go. It doesn't tell you what kinds of things they have, what the waiting is like.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had to go to a food pantry. It literally felt, I felt disgusting. Like, I felt like I was like just a number. I didn't matter. It was crowded. Like, it was just one of the, and then like what they gave me was like some of the most, I don't think it's legal, because like they gave me literally a Ziploc bag of something that was frozen and deep fried, and I don't know what, like no label, which I'm pretty sure again is illegal. There was no like fresh food, nothing.
We should let Sam get
Sorry,
back.
yeah.
No, no,
I'm so
you're
sorry.
I was gonna say, I wanna move
I'm
on.
autistic.
Yeah.
You had a question? You raised your hand? Yeah.
I was going to say about, I went to one of the governor's summit conferences, I don't know if he does it every year. Went once, auditorium full of people, and it was all presentations of ways that we, public, could pay for the things that I really thought our state should be doing.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was glorious, or something, they had wonderful stories of wonderful things people did, but it was a movement to take it from his responsibility. Here you go, guys, and we'll love you for it.
It's a real problem. So after we've adopted the policy, then now we get to the nitty gritty of things. Here's how we're actually, again, that famous Reagan phrase, from the government, I'm here to help. This is that step. How are we going out into the community and actually doing what the work is, like what work needs to be done? These aren't really steps that go in a straight line. These are all just kind of steps that are involved in the policy implementation process as I see it. But again, we do have to come back to that idea that we have to reframe ideas. And so as you dive down into the rulemaking process for state agencies, for instance, all of the rules are technically online. You can go hunt them down if you'd like. I actually had a friend who worked to kind of collate every single state agency rule a couple of years ago. They will have things like definitions. They will have specific policy procedures, all contained within those rules. And you have the opportunity as the public to understand those, right? And so it's worth noting as you're kind of moving through the policymaking process. At every step, there is a new framing step. There is a new definition put forth by whoever is implementing the policy or trying to adopt the policy. And it's worth paying attention to how those definitions may stay the same, how they may change. You can get a lot of subtle but important work done by helping an agency reframe a definition as they're moving to implement a policy, right? Dr. Choate is very skilled at writing white papers for agencies, right? Which are these things that people write, like just laying out, here's a bunch of data, here's how I think you should define this problem, here's an interesting policy you might consider to fix this problem, right? And those white papers are very interesting and helpful ways to help agencies reframe their policies as they move into that implementation, maybe alter a definition a little bit, that sort of thing. This is also where the fiscal session comes in, for instance, right? Policies usually take money to implement. And so it's important to understand where the money is coming from and where it's going. And this is another thing that really takes some effort to dive into. For example, in the state of Arkansas, there's all of these different funds that they can move money here and there. But at some point, somebody's got to write a check. Money's got to come from somewhere. And so it's worth paying attention to where the money is coming from and what divisions, what state agencies, what nonprofits even, where the money is going to, because it's always going to take money at one point. I'm going to skip number 3 for now because we're a little short on time, but number 4, a policy does no good if nobody knows that the policy does any good. And so good policy making always has some kind of avenue for evaluation, whether that's tracking certain kinds of data, what kind of data they're tracking, how they're tracking data. Again, I'm not a data guy, so I don't want to like step out of my lane. There are a million different ways to data, data mine, data track. It could involve stakeholder interviews again, coming into a community after a policy has been implemented for a few years and saying, hey, you've had this government program that we passed 2 years ago. How is that helping you? This is what the governor's maternal health committee has been doing, for instance, right? They have one side that's analyzing that kind of data, and they have another side, a group of folks that have been going out into these rural communities and interviewing women that have struggled with maternal health as they've moved through their pregnancy or struggled to access healthcare resources, Medicare, Medicaid, all of those sorts of things. But the key is that there is some kind of evaluation metric, right? Again, we don't know if it's a good policy if we can't track what the policy is actually doing. And so always keep an eye out for what that evaluation process is as you're moving through the policymaking process, because if there isn't one, it's bad policy. Because we can't tell if it's a good policy or bad policy if we don't have the ability to understand it after it's been implemented.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Delphia. And I'm wondering about the Franklin County Prison Project because it's in a weird place where I feel like they're in the implementation, I guess, stage of the policy process. But it's unclear where to sort of help monitor it and whatnot. So are they in part 2 here where they're acquiring and allocating resources? Can you talk a little bit about that in this sort of messy process?
For a lightning quick round of context for anyone who's not aware, last fall the governor announced the construction of a 3,000 bed prison in Franklin County, a community that absolutely vehemently has expressed that they do not want a 3,000 bed prison in their county. The answer to your question is one of the reasons that this is a bad policy is because they're all over the place. They haven't allocated proper resources. They haven't gone through the rulemaking process properly. They are in like steps 1 through 4 all at once. And so that's one of the reasons I think the community is so frustrated because, let's even go back to, framing the problem, setting the agenda, right? She just announced on October 31st, I think it was, like, hey, congrats on your new prison. We bought the land 6 months ago. That is very poor agenda setting, if I may say so. And so when government comes in and kind of throws something at a community like this, that's one great key that they haven't gone through a good, solid, robust policymaking process. Did that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
For sure. Okay, the last step is evaluating the policy. And I kind of got into this a little bit in the last slide. But we have to know whether our policy is effective because at some point, we're going to have to pass a new policy. We're going to have to pass another policy. And so if we don't know if our policymaking process is effective or not, then we can't, we have no ability to do what's called a lessons learned process. We have no idea whether or not we need to change anything the next time we're going to pass a policy, or if we did a great job and the policy is working as it should, and we don't need to tweak anything, right? A lot of these policies are so, all-encompassing too that there are ways to tweak little bits of the policy. And so that's another reason why data collection, stakeholder interviews, lessons learned are all so key. I also want to emphasize as we kind of come to my little 5-step thing that I genuinely think good policymaking is a cyclical process. So at every point, a good policymaker will come back to the stakeholders and say, here's what I'm thinking, here's where we are at in the policymaking process. What do you guys think, right? That's why a good representative will do things like town halls and ask for input from their community. That's why it's frustrating for communities when their representatives don't do town halls, for instance. And that's just one example of ways to get those stakeholder interviews. But yeah, that's why we don't want to think of policymaking as something with a start and an end, because every policy will spark, new ideas for new policies that can benefit the community. And so that's why we have to kind of keep in mind that cyclical idea of policymaking, because it never ends. Problems keep popping up in the world, and when run well, government is an excellent way to fix those problems. But fixing those problems requires policy, requires understanding the policy, requires setting the agenda with our stakeholders, requires understanding what state agency is going to have to implement our policy, requires how we're going to track the policy, So that's why it can be dangerous to think of like, great, I passed the bill, my hands are clean. Well, like, no, representative, we need to understand if your policy worked. Like, come back, tell us how the policy went. A good example of this is Senator Dismay a few sessions ago passed a law asking for a certain kind of like Medicaid voucher to be expanded. And tasked the division or the Department of Human Services with implementing that policy. And at a committee meeting a few weeks ago, the representative from DHS was, talking. He's like, he kind of heard something. I was watching the committee meeting. He's like, wait, are you telling me that I passed this law 4 years ago and you haven't actually implemented the policy yet? And he got really frustrated. But in some sense, that's a little bit on him, right? Because it's his responsibility to follow up on the policy that he passed, to talk with the stakeholders, to hound DHS, to make sure that they are actually implementing what he asked them, what he passed a law to implement. So keep in mind that this is always a process. Yes?
How much of our challenges do you think are because our legislature's part-time?
This is a really interesting question. I wish I could get Senator Letting on the phone. He has a lot of interesting thoughts. As with many things in life, it is a pro and con situation. I would hesitate to say that all of Arkansas's problems historically might have been solved by a full-time legislature. I think a lot of them could be helped. A lot of our current immediate problems could be helped by having a full-time legislature. It does depend on how much. Problem with having a full-time legislature is that you have to expand government to staff that legislature. This general state government is reluctant to expand government, and so I doubt that would happen. But it does give the legislators a lot more time to become not necessarily experts, but to understand the process better themselves, right? You will often hear somebody joke in a committee meeting like, oh, well, I'm just reading this bill for the first time. Like, man, this is your job. Read the bill. Like, this is what we pay you $40,000 for 4 months' work. So, like, is to read the bill. So a full-time legislature does give them more time to actually dive into this process that I've, briefly outlined tonight. But it's certainly not going to solve every problem. It's an interesting idea, though. Again, Senator Letting, for those of you who don't know, is the senator from Fayetteville. He is very responsive, loves to chat with constituents that aren't even his. We have a great relationship. I text him all the time. He's a fun guy.
He has a great newsletter.
Yeah. Oh, yes. You should sign up for his newsletter. Absolutely. But yeah, he has some interesting thoughts on a full-time legislature and the differences between that and our part-time legislature. Great question. As again, speaking very broadly, these are 3 ways to evaluate whether the policymaking process has been effective. You have to get those stakeholders, that community engaged. They have to understand I'll use the phrase, what's being done to them and why. The Franklin County Prison is a great example again. A community, this has been imposed on a community that very much doesn't want it. They are willing to work with the governor to help solve the problem in a different way, but the governor has decided that this is the way we're going to solve the problem, and that makes the community very frustrated. You have to have good data. Again, to use the Franklin County, a lot of the data does not support building the prison where the governor wants to build the prison. There's workforce issues, there's water supply issues, all of these, go down the list. The data does not support building the prison there. So this is a poor policymaking process, in my opinion. And this is, at the end of the day, a process of people. And so you have to have good leadership when you're making the policymaking process. No policy survives contact with the enemy. And so you have to have a good leader to say, okay, hold on, this isn't working. We need to step back for just a hot second. What's not going well right now? And how do we fix it? Because again, this isn't a perfect process and no policy will ever be perfect. And so clear leadership in the policymaking process, whether that's by a passionate legislator that really wants to get things done. Senator Disming's free breakfast bill is a great example. He had a goal in mind and he did everything he could to get it across the line. And I applaud him for doing that. It is a phenomenal bill. I'm so happy he got it passed. But there was a lot of pushback from a lot of, I won't call them stakeholders, but from a lot of commentators throughout the process. And Senator Disming's clear leadership, clear understanding of the stakes helped get that policy across the line. Poor leadership can really hamstring policy implementation, right? I don't necessarily love the LEARNS Act as a whole. but I think it could have been rolled out a little more effectively had Secretary Oliva been a little more on the ball with explaining the policy to stakeholders, with explaining to the public, school district superintendents, even teachers and students, like, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Let me work with you on that, right? That leader is a very important point of interface between the policymaker and the people that will be affected by the policy. So that clear leadership can really help get tough policies that are complicated and nuanced across the finish line and circle back into that policy making cycle. Lord, man. That's the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any more questions? That actually y'all are great. Took great questions that took a lot longer than I thought, which is fine by me. Yes.
So happened to the baby Olivia.
Oh, yeah.
I spoke again. I came back to see what happened when it was supposed to come back. And it didn't come back.
Were you there yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it never came, what does that mean?
So I think we chatted about this a little bit earlier. One of the frustrating blocks to transparency is that the publicly posted agendas for committee meetings are not the agendas that the legislators have. So the way they can decide, they can let the chair of the committee know that they're actually not going to present their bill for passage that day in the committee, and they won't necessarily do that with enough time to alter that publicly available agenda. So at some point, Representative Bentley must have told Senator English that she wasn't going to bring the bill that day, but they don't have time to alter, or maybe they don't want to alter the agenda. And it's very, as an activist, someone who is helping people like Dr. Choate and Davis to get people speaking in front of committees, like people take off work to do this. People, it's very frustrating. And it has everything to do with the rules that each committee makes as the legislative session starts. Each committee will set kind of its own specific rules. Again, Senator Letting in his newsletter has talked about how a good committee chair will keep their agenda very clean, and by clean he means bills that aren't getting heard will get put onto the deferred list, so community members know that that bill won't be heard that day, and they get really kind of mad when a legislator won't move their bill off that deferred list. A lot of the committee chairs aren't quite as sharp at doing that, and so you run into situations like Baby Olivia where the bill's on the agenda. I have no idea if it's going to be heard tomorrow or not, but it's there, and I'm going to be there just in case.
If it's not on the agenda, it may be done anyway.
Well, not necessarily. If it's not on the agenda, they can't hear it, but it's, they're all, again, this is one of those inside baseball things. There's 4 different sections to an agenda. There's regular bills, there's deferred bills, there's bills that have a special order of business, there's constitutional amendments and resolutions, right? They do not do a good job, I personally think, on purpose, of educating the public on how things actually work. So.
Say something about that. Having been at the legislature for 25 years or more, representing a nonprofit, I was not a lobbyist, but technically I was, but I was an advocate because I worked for C3. But in the process of doing that work, I remember a time in which you had 10 people. If you had a House Education Committee, 20 people on there, 10 of them are Republicans, 10 were Democrats. Senate Education Committee, education was where I was spending all my time. There would be a balance of 4 and 4, 5 and 5, whatever in that particular committee. Since we've shifted to such a super majority, the kind of discussions and debate that used to go on that would actually cause people to be more responsive, not only to the speakers, to folks coming in. There's less concern for that, it seems like, over time.
Yeah.
The last the last 6 or 7, 8 years, it's just less and less concern for the fact that people are coming in, and also having some balance on the committees. When you have such a preponderance numbers, you can't balance committees anymore. So it kind of, you lose the debate over issues. There's not much discussion about the positives and negatives of an issue. From a couple of people on the committee themselves will speak, but they're not going to get anywhere. And hopefully, though, it'll be heard not only by the legislators that are possibly on the fence about that issue, but nonetheless, it's not what it used to be. And it's another reason why, with the two-party system, when you're way out of balance, the process suffers because you don't get as much balance in the sharing of ideas or in concern for the processes that we go through. Just like today in the committee that we were in,
State agencies for the.
state agencies, they were gonna, the big thought was that 212
Was not on the agenda last night.
and it was on the deferred list. And
Got put off this morning,
but
right?
then there were folks in the community talking about it's gonna run today. It's gonna run today. So some of us got there, folks came from Fort Smith down to speak on 212, and the first thing that the chair said was, we're not gonna run 212 today because we didn't get it off the deferred list. There's a rule, you have to have it off for 24, you have to announce it for 24 hours in advance so people can come in. So people acted on an assumption based on rumor, and you have to do that though. The thing is, if you don't do that, there's times that, I mean, the bill that was listed to go first, 207, Hammer's bill, was the very last bill taken. And folks who weren't even they were on the list down there somewhere, came in and sat and got run before that time. So it's up to the chair. But used to, the chair followed, and still some committee chairs follow that rule pretty strictly.
Representative Dalby on House Judiciary, for instance, is well known for being a very sharp committee chair. She keeps her agenda clean. She keeps things moving. If a bill hasn't been heard for one session or like one meeting or so, she'll make them move it to the deferred list because they're a busy committee and she's got work to do. Gazaway on House state agencies is pretty decent as well. But folks like, if I may call someone out, Senator English on Senate Education, not a clean agenda keeper. She's the baby Olivia. And it's frustrating. I kind of want to maybe close with this. I have laid out a broad cycle of policymaking. I apologize if I've come off a little bit cynical. I know I have laid out a lot of blocks to transparency and blocks to citizen participation in the process. But I say that to hopefully give you a better understanding of A, what you're up against, and B, a better understanding of the process as a whole. So if you run into a block, you can sit back and say, okay, I have run into something I don't understand. Here's a way that I can move around it or go through it, over it, do some research, figure out what's going on, and then move through it so I can be an engaged citizen, so I can get to that committee, get to that public comment, for a state agency or so. And so I've tried to do, I hope I've been somewhat successful in laying out all of the things you may run into that are frustrating, so that when you do, you don't sit back and get too frustrated, right? Because when the process is designed to frustrate you, they anticipate you getting so frustrated that you will not engage in the process. So keep pushing through the process. Maybe it'll change someday.
Well, yeah, I would just say too, right now, what we absolutely cannot do is just let them go forward without anybody saying anything. Every time one of us stands up and says, this is why this is that I disagree with this bill and why, it's on public record, and they can never say, well, no one ever told me that people wouldn't sign petitions because they had to say it's a criminal offense. No, we told you that.
We yelled at you for 6 hours.
It's been noted. And we have to, until we can get people to vote differently, we have to just stay on top of it. And Joan, baby Olivia, that has changed dramatically from what we originally saw. And so the testimony that you gave, helped change that bill. It's not great, but it's much better. So.
Yep.
Instead of one video, there's like 4.
Yeah, but they don't have to see baby Olivia.
That's
unless
right.
It's in sex education.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they added in an
yeah.
option, so talking about the rulemaking process, the bill has a clause that will require the Department of Education to promulgate a list of potential videos that a school district can select. Now, baby Olivia still has to be on that list, but they don't necessarily have to pick baby Olivia. So our next goal, let's say this bill, we're actually not sure the bill is gonna pass, we think we may have solved it, fingers crossed, knock on wood, all the things. However, say the bill passes, our next job is, as engaged citizens, finding where that public comment is gonna happen, when it's gonna happen, and submitting so many videos that are put forward by the American College of Gynecologists and Obstetrics, UAMS. Any video that is any video better than baby Olivia, I'm gonna take that win. Wins are few and far between right now, I'm taking it.
Well, the one of the doctors you guys got to testify said, if you want a video that does this, we'll make it
Do
for
it.
you.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
We had an advanced practice registered nurse that was gonna speak yesterday, and part of her testimony that we helped her, plan out was, here's what I'd love to see in a video. Like, let us help you do what you're trying,
Instead of anti-abortion group.
Sure. Well, and it's not even, her point was, she works with, this is going down a rabbit hole a little bit. She specifically works with mostly pregnant adolescents. And another part of her testimony was talking about how it's not even that this is put forward by an anti-abortion extremist group. It's that we have one of the highest rates of teen pregnancy in the nation, and I am having patients who literally do not understand how they clearly they did the deed that gets you pregnant, and they have no idea how. I didn't do anything that would get me. But obviously you did, but you don't understand.
I told them that my first testimony.
That's what that kind of misinformation does.
Educators asked us
They
to come in.
genuinely do not get what the process is.
We have the highest rate of teenagers with 3 children
Mhm.
in the country. 3 children, they're still teenagers.
But I mean,
Sure.
that's been proven though, is abstinence only education does nothing, it actually.
Bad policy.
They don't care.
Yeah.
They don't wanna stop teen pregnancy. There's many solutions to that.
Yeah, I was just talking to a colleague of mine who works in a different state, Indiana, and they also have a Republican supermajority. But they seem to have, and this person does advocacy work with the legislature, and they seem to have she said that if they bring enough scrutiny, they can kill bills.
Mhm.
But I think one of the things that she was saying, which I've also heard here, is that you kind of need to get it in committee.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what
and-
we've been trying to do.
Right, and I think the only thing I can think of that was a hot button issue and maybe Baby Olivia will be the second one, that was the so-called drag ban.
Oh, yeah.
2023.
Mhm.
We're I think that was a real win.
Yeah.
By the time they passed that bill, it didn't do anything.
Yeah.
They still passed it.
Yeah. So,
You
'cause
know,
they have to, and that's what Baby Olivia.
And I think that's what we hope for Baby Olivia,
Yeah.
right? Is that they still pass the bill, but it's just been so fundamentally detuned
And-
so that
Yeah.
it doesn't.
And that's why that first setting the agenda is also so important for stakeholders to be involved, because you can convince, especially here in Arkansas where we do kind of have that libertarian streak, you can get a couple of votes here and there by saying this would really remove local control, right? This will remove here, let me lay out so very clearly for you why this would limit my rights at my individual liberty, right? It's a great phrase. If you can work that phrase in anywhere, do it.
Say that again?
Individual liberty. They love their individual liberty.
We all like that.
But genuinely, that's why it's important for us to interact with our legislators. And again, it's frustrating that line between inside baseball and the average engaged citizens. But if you know the legislators on the committee, you can also target, I know that Baby Olivia, Senator Sullivan's on that committee. I know that Senator Sullivan really loves that local control. And we got him on that initial vote because the law required this one specific video to be showed everywhere, right? We are working, Franklin County Prison, right? We're working with Senator Hickey and Senator Rice. They are for locking more people up, but they really hate when the process gets subverted like it was in Franklin County. They're fine with the prison, but the prison is gonna be, like, you have to go through the proper process to get that prison built where it should be built, right? And so, you have to kind of know the legislature as a whole, in order to have the more you know on that front, the easier it is to impact the policymaking process. I work with Representative Johnson sometimes. He's out of Fort Smith. Disagree with him on a lot, but he's a practicing ER doctor. Man, if I need a good healthcare bill passed, Rep. Johnson's my guy. He will run it without a question. And that's helpful to know. But that requires time and investment. This is my job. My job is to know who Representative Johnson is and what kind of bills that I can get him to run for me. It can be tough when,
Couple of things.
Sure. Sorry, I've been rambling on for a while now.
Besides Ron Coda, I wanted to call out Melissa Foltz, who gave a very impassioned testimony on the direct democracy. One of the things that she said that really resonated was, look, if you want to make better petition bills, why don't you work with the canvassers? Because they are in the field, they know exactly what comes up, they know what the challenges are. And I just think knowing the genesis of some of these bills will inform you a lot as to how sincere they are.
Yeah.
Because he'll say that we want to bring more integrity to the process, when it looks to a lot of people like he wants to have more technicalities which he can use to throw out petitions he disagrees with. So I think knowing that type of background, how did this come about? Was it drafted in a sincere policy making framework, or is it to push some agenda?
That's why that top down versus top down, bottom up. Thank you. It's been a long day. It's so important because it can give you kind of an insight into, is this legislation, since that's a great word, sincere? Can I actually maybe get something done to help improve the legislation? If you're planning out a testimony, it rarely does you good to yell at the legislators, although it does feel good sometimes. It helps a lot if you say, here's why I think this is a bad policy for all of the reasons that we've been through tonight. Let us help you do something different. They may not take you up on the offer. Oftentimes they won't. But at least you'll be on record saying, hey, I'm not just here to oppose whatever it is that you guys are doing. I actually am here to help make good policy, right? Let me help you. Let's make this a collaborative effort. Let's do this cyclical process together.
Stanifer was really good.
She's great. Yeah. I thought she might get him on a couple of things. I thought she might get him.
But every time we tell them why it's going to inhibit our ability to do direct democracy, they're like, good, yep, got it.
Yep.
We're just telling them what they want to hear, because that's what they want to hear.
That's what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Telling them that it was unconstitutional and here's all XYZ reasons.
That was not.
Great idea.
That was good.
Yeah.
So I've kind of noticed that senators and legislators are kind of like toddlers. Because literally redirecting is something that works with toddlers, as is breaking things down in complex terms from a base level they'll understand. And you constantly have to keep them on track, and it's very kid gloves kind of thing, which is interesting. Maybe they just need snacks.
Sometimes they do just need snacks. Sometimes we all just need snacks, Yeah.
I have a question in regards to the example you were giving earlier about the prison being built, I forget, in the town.
Yeah, Franklin County.
But, and this circles back around to what we were just talking about, top, bottom, and making sure that things are sincere. What about when is there a stopgap or a way, besides common sense, hello, that can tell you, back to the example of the prison, at what point is someone being held to account if there's money behind? You know, again, this is supposed to be by the people, for the people.
Oh, you think
That's
that the campaign contributions to Sarah Huckabee Sanders' campaign by nonprofit prison companies
Exactly.
might have some
So,
correlation there?
how,
To me, it begs the question, if for all those reasons it was bad policy, the data didn't support it, you know, why are we just gonna drop it on somebody that doesn't want it?
Jen, we're
There
going
must be
through these
something else going
formalities.
on, and it's
Oh,
not
that wasn't
transparent.
how that committee, because it wasn't deferred and this was not propagated. It's like, there's all these things that, sure, the guys in the beginning, that wore the white wigs, who created everything, sure. They
Good times.
sounded right, they had
Yeah.
beautiful handwriting, you know, this fit with them. But to still go through the motion of things that are so it's pretend to go by the book and, oh, I have to do. If there are obvious, and you've just given me examples, obvious, blatant, and then everybody's wasting their time. Not only the people elected, but the people like all of you that want to go to a committee, like you say, take their time out of their busy day to come and sit. I guess I find myself just being frustrated by the pretend aspect. There's an elephant in the room. That frustrates me to no end.
I can't disagree with you.
And I don't think you're being cynical. I appreciate that you were calling things out, because as soon as you are pointing out what is broken or what doesn't work, or a red flag to look out for, being able, the public, to be able to comment, all these things, I appreciate it, because that tells me that there's still work to do.
I would say
You're not sitting in there cold,
there is a fundamental core of optimism and hope within me that
No.
somehow is managing to hold on. So I genuinely believe that the process is broken, but there's an argument to be made that the process is actually working as intended. The intention is just to not, yeah. So it's a very fine line to walk, and it just takes this is really going down a side trail. One of the issues with the lack of local newsrooms, for instance, is because once upon a time, it was the news that would hold, like, oh my gosh, Sarah Huckabee Sanders got this much, money from private prison companies. Like, hey, we should maybe look at. Not really the case anymore. When there's only 3 legitimate news organizations practically in the state. Yeah, it's tough to track.
There's good people, there's elected officials.
Yeah.
Not all crooked, there are good people.
Even
In this system would work if they did it honestly,
Yeah.
with no hidden agenda,
We're about at the point of all we can do now is give them rope, pray we don't get them.
Okay, first of all, the guillotines.
I will say, look at it this way. It takes a lot of, we've talked about how many roadblocks there are, how much effort it takes to be fully informed on the policymaking process. One good way to not keep yourself from losing your mind a little bit is pick a thing, one thing, become an expert on that thing. Like you've testified at Baby Olivia, is that right? Yeah. Make reproductive rights or women's healthcare your thing, and every time you track who's on the public health committees, you track who's on, running XYZ bill. And that will still take you a lot of time, but it is much less overwhelming if you can look at some awful thing like the Franklin County Prison and go like, that seems really terrible. I simply do not have, burnout is a real thing in this space. I simply do not have the capability, the time to care about everything, right? I get paid to care about everything, and that's great for me, but it still is very difficult, right? As engaged citizens, pick a thing, make that your thing, and bug all of the legislators that do anything related to that thing. Yeah.
So I like obviously concerned that I think everyone has is like the lobbying, the political,
Sure.
donations. I know that there is somewhere on the government website where you can actually find like who's donated, things like that. Is there any way to like regulate that to like see if okay maybe this is incredibly unethical or the thing they're giving or the way they're doing it is unethical and like report it?
There's you can report things to various kinds of ethics commissions. This is one area where the state transparency is actually like kind of solid. It's pretty easy to find out where money's coming from. The website sucks. You have to learn to use the website, but the information itself is relatively simple to find with a little bit of creative Googling and if you know your Boolean search terms. So the regulation there is just to make the Secretary of State's website not suck so bad, but I don't really.
You have to do a little research.
Yeah. You need to have
This
kind of
is that.
a bite somewhere, but
Yeah.
it's relatively easy to find.
I need to jump in real quick.
Sure.
We had a couple of folks on the chat. The chat, I couldn't see the chat, so we're getting here the last, Delphia asked, first thing she asked was, she's heard 95% of policy is actually rules, but not legislation. Is that true in Arkansas?
I wouldn't want to put a specific number on it, but the majority of what is actually affecting your day-to-day life is made by rules and not legislation. For sure.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean?
Remember when we were talking earlier about that?
Experts, okay.
Yeah, a lot of what the agencies are doing in the day-to-day business of government, if you will, is based on what rules were like promulgated, is the fancy technical term for it. So the again, a quick reminder, the legislature will pass a law that says we want this agency to do this in very broad strokes. They will then ask that specific agency to promulgate rules, and that's what will impact you as a community member or as a stakeholder. So I think Delphia asked that question. I don't know if it's 95% for sure, but it's a lot. It's quite a bit.
And I think you did talk about the Franklin County Prison Project a little bit.
Yeah.
As this part of the process.
Yeah, and again, I think that's why that it's such a poor policy because they're all over the process. They're just really,
the people of Franklin County.
Yeah.
Feel like they have a vote in that deal.
Mhm,
They weren't really included on the front end. So.
I mean, yeah, imagine the government walking into your backyard and saying, hey, 6 months ago, thank you so much for coming. We actually bought the lot next to you and we're gonna dump a feed lot right next, that's like kind of how they feel. Nobody really wants that.
Yeah, we're a minute past 8 o'clock and certainly don't want to discourage y'all. We have to be out here around 8:30. I do want them to be aware though. I don't want to run at 8 o'clock and see these to be moving on. You want to stay with business though? Welcome to do that.
If you need to head out, I am happy to stay for a couple more minutes. If you need to head out, have a few.
Listen, next time it's going to be on direct democracy. We're going to have Kristen Higgins will be here from U of A Extension Service with the Department of Agriculture.
She's great.
Really they do some great work on analyzing different types of bills and different types of initiatives like referendums. So and then there'll probably I think we're going to have a panel too to talk about the last system. When we went through during the summer when we had all the petitions out, some of the folks who actually worked on some of those petitions are going to talk about lessons learned from that experience and going forward with the referendum, depending on how these bills affect the future of referendums in Arkansas. So it's going to be an incredible session, I think, and I hope you'll come back for that one as well. Appreciate you being here, and again, stay and visit some if you want to.
Yeah.
Appreciate you
Doing this.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I hope it was helpful in some way.
So start from scratch.
Sure.
For the new bottom seven coach.
I can make county.
I know what the opposing factors are and how the items, but
where from a grassroots standpoint, and you start, when you don't have. Yeah.
Look at the notes from the earlier
And then everybody gets $100.
I think it's countywide, so it means you certain numbers of voters all the time. And so it's what we call it will, I would recommend that you let counties, tri-counties sometimes still allow alcohol to be served at certain kind of restaurants. So you might see there are restaurants you have served them, right? But again, it depends on the county because. Okay.
Well, they're not. It's right here. Children's operation is, put it out there. Commissioner, he was liberal. In addition to all the.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this so much. I totally appreciate you.
That'll do it. That'll do it. That'll do it.
So then that's like, I really.
Well, and somebody asked me today, I was at the Capitol, they said, what do y'all do? What do y'all do? And I said, well, basically, teachers said. You have to.
That's beautiful.
He's come over. You know, they said, hey, it was Johnny Ryan, one of our legislators.
There's one thing that you mentioned in years like outside of broad maybe
And he asked me,
it's so complicated and twisted. All that to say, if we go back to talking about agenda setting, you kind of have an easy job.
Because I was in education.
Drive 40 miles to take kids drink, and so it's just a matter of. Like that's anytime he runs his audience, you're like, hey man,
You got started as
him right now.
I knew some.
So you do have kind of an
When I was
advantage
teaching
there.
Jackson School in the seventies.
I guess the thing is
One of the best social studies teachers I ever was the.
He
was great, but he is the exception.
Doesn't mean it's always gonna be great.
to take this up and I
Oh, great. Thank you.
I'd love to sit and get into AUD with me, to talk
Thank you. Yeah, great question.
So much.
So happy.
Thank you
I'm
so
so
much.
happy. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you can tell I'm passionate.
No, that's why I do it. That's why I do it.
So, I'm just like.
Bye, Jana.
Bye, Janet.
Like I agree,
Yeah.
I think it's one issue, and I got tons of mine, are actually way more important, but.
Another spot to maybe start, kind of taking the temperature, if you will, is either the county parties. Like you drink, Democrats do. And any meetings at the county library is another good way to kind of gauge. People that go to the library tend to be a little more engaged, so you have. The more people you have collecting signatures, the easier. And I also again, alcohol law is very weird in the States, so I'm not sure if it's a county issue. But
It's just a matter of now that you have all these, and did they pass?
some of them have, but most of those laws will not affect the county. There's a few